Hello, 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 and welcome to yet another Motor One Test Car Happy Hour. Thank you all for joining, or thank you for joining in the future, as there's nobody on the stream right now. But I know that you're coming. I can feel it. I can feel the people out there right now. I'm Seth. I'm joined today by Mr. Brett T. Evans, a regular on the Test Car Happy Hour, and Mr. Christopher Smith, who some of you may know as one of the star faces and voices of the Motor One Rambling About Cars podcast. Chris has been gracious enough to jump on today and pepper Brett and I with questions about what we've been driving, taking a small break from his normal job of writing all of the car news that is fit to print, right?
Wait, you guys drive stuff? I wasn't even aware of that.
Every once in a while, yeah, we have a car.
Okay.
So, yeah, you guys, same deal as usual, wherever you are, whether you're watching this on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook. First of all, thank you very much for doing that. Second of all, leave us a comment, ask us the question in the comments wherever you are. We will get it. We'll answer it live or do our best to answer it live in the process of talking about some cars. So today I've got a couple things to talk about. Brett has got a thing to talk about, but why don't we start with the Acura, Brett? Because the two cars that I've driven the last 2 weeks or that I'm driving and have been driving, I think are really interesting to talk about in context with one another. So why don't we start with the car on the cover today, the Acura TLX Type S in that fetching gold.
That is the best color on the market right now. That is Tiger Eye
Whoa.
Pearl, and I love it. I think it's fantastic.
That's a hot take, but yeah.
Anyone who disagrees is wrong. There's no other opinion on this matter. Anyway, TLX Type S. Yeah, it's pretty cool. This is Acura's return to performance, they say. You know, the TLX came out a couple of years ago. 2020, I think. And they kind of said that there would be a Type S variant, which I think is the first Type S in at least a decade for them, you know, maybe a decade and a half. So, and they did it right. They've done a really good job with this car. It's got a 3-liter twin turbocharged V6. Maybe not twin turbocharged, twin scroll turbocharged V6, 355 horsepower, 354 pound-feet. And it's great. It drives really well. I was really honestly pretty genuinely surprised. I do not love the standard TLX. I think that it's a nice looking car, but it kind of like falls flat when you really press on it. And this one has not done the same. It's just been a really fun, enjoyable car. Sounds great, drives really well. I've really had a lot of fun. I was surprised.
Yeah, I mean, Acura has had for many years, you know, like been obviously respected in terms of they sell a lot of SUVs, like everybody. Let's just start there, right? But they built a reputation and been very respected for building sports sedans that kind of like edge right up to the level of sort of BMW, Audi, and Mercedes, right? But maybe haven't in many cases been able to surpass the level of what's happening with those rear biased or rear wheel drive German sedans. So is this new ground for Acura? Do you think that they're at a point, like both from drivability, you know, like fun to drive, and then quality materials, where they're in the thick of those things?
That's kind of a challenging question. You know, the TLX Type S is priced right at the heart of the BMW M340i and Mercedes C43 AMG. It's about $55,000 fully loaded. So, you know, it is kind of right there playing in that same space. I honestly don't think that dynamically it's quite there yet. You know, it's still there's a photo that I have of the engine bay that maybe we can throw up there that shows that in spite of that nice long hood and that nice like rear, you know, good dash to axle ratio, you can still see that the engine is still pretty far forward of that front axle. And that's kind of, yeah, there it is right there. You can see that engine is hanging out almost completely forward of the front axle. So it's really hard when you have that much weight up front to have it be really as dynamic as a rear drive biased car. But I will say this, if you plan ahead good in this car, if you like brake for the corners in advance and enter with a good entry speed, you don't chuck it into the corner, but then squeeze on the throttle on your way out, the super handling all-wheel drive is amazing. Like it routes so much. I think it routes up to 70% of the engine's available power to one rear wheel or the other. So you can really just get a lot of like yaw on the exit, which is super fun. So you can't chuck it around quite as well as you can a rear drive car, but it doesn't make it any less entertaining to drive. It's just a different kind of entertaining. So I think they've done a really good job with kind of branding this car and marketing it as a good, solid performance sedan. It's larger than the 3 Series of the C-Class, so you have a bigger back seat, a bigger trunk. and it's still priced right in there. So, you know, if your priority is absolute driving pleasure, you might want an AMG or a you know, M340i. But if you kind of just want a good all arounder, I spent 300 miles in it on the highway as well, and it was great. It's very comfortable, very smooth, very quiet. So they've really done an excellent job. As underwhelmed as I was by the standard TLX, I've been so impressed by the Type S. So we'll give it that.
We got a couple of notes here. EKG, Canadian enthusiast. Yet again, I think last week he also had something to say about the Chevy Trax. I'm not sure why he's standing the Trax, but he says the new 2024 Chevy Trax is better than the Kicks Venue, Rogue Sport, and affordable SUVs? Question mark. We don't know. We don't know anything about it. We know that the new Trax exists. And what, Smith? Did you write that article? What do we actually know about the Chevy Trax? Just to segue for 90 seconds.
We know that it looks better.
Yeah, 100%.
No, I mean, it just debuted. It just debuted. I think, and Bruce and I were actually talking about this a little bit before podcast a couple days ago. They've really, I think they've done a good service in making that a better looking vehicle. I think people are going to take the Trax more seriously maybe than they did before. And I mean, they're at a price point that's going to be attractive to a lot of people. So I'm not really an SUV guy, but I'm actually pretty interested and excited to see where that goes.
It's kind of curious because they've priced it lower than the Trailblazer. Yeah. But it's a slightly larger car. Like in terms of size, it's positioned a little bit above the Trailblazer. And so they're kind of like aiming for this really like, it's also a little bit decontented. You know, it's got a 6-speed automatic instead of either a 9-speed or a CVT. So, you know, they kind of are targeting this like heart of the crossover consumer market that wants space and value and good in-cabin technology and don't necessarily care about driving dynamics or technical details. So I think it's probably
I would say the things that buyer typically, I don't know, historically, the Trax buyer cares about value and value and value, right? So, and then space and content and all that stuff too. I don't mean to demean it. The other thing is I'm very curious because I know that the origins of that Trax are a Korean market car, as they have been for a while. So there might be some compromises sort of behind the scenes or some decisions about how to bring it to market that have a lot to do on existing product for a market that has nothing to do with ours right now. So fascinating question, Canadian enthusiast. Thank you for asking. I'm excited to be able to talk about all of those SUVs when we're driving them. And certainly we're excited to be able to get in the Chevy Trax. Probably going to be a little bit before we're driving that one and then talk about it here on the happy hour. So, man, tons of questions. First of all, thank you guys for the questions. We also have, looks like we're dropping some links to the video of the TLX Type S, which is great. One more, maybe more pertinent to bring us back to Acura. Moath Ramdane on cars is laughing about Audi. I'm not sure why. And then he says the front end of the car looks like an Audi. You guys know my firm stance on like this thing looks like that thing is. I just don't really. I'm not that interested in playing the game, but I will allow you both to play. Does the front end look like an Audi to you?
I mean, I can see a little bit. You have to look beyond the grill. I think. I mean, when you look at the front end of an Audi, the first thing you're picking up on is the grill. On the TLX, I mean, the grill is obviously much narrower, right? But they still have those body lines that kind of come in and do that. Kind of do that bracketing. And I think I can see a little similarity there. I always liked what Acura's styling language was. I think the TLX just looks fantastic. I'm not sold on gold, Brett. Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay to be wrong. Don't worry about it.
I mean, you say gold, and I think 1974 Mercury Montego. That's like perfect in gold.
I don't know that I have a problem with that. I think that's totally fine that you're equating a 1974 Montego with a TLX Type S.
Acura might not love it. Montego gold.
More vintage.
It's not
colors
bad.
On modern cars. I say, give me all the vintage colors on modern cars.
It's not gray or silver, so props.
That's right.
It's kind of interesting that he mentions Audi too, though, because Audi went through a similar like dynamic metamorphosis a couple of years ago when they decided that they were going to take all of their transverse engines and turn them longitudinal and push them back in the engine bay. So even though you had a front-wheel drive biased car, it still had very rear drive proportions. And I think Acura would really do well to do that with their next TLX, give it a longitudinal engine that's actually mounted, back in the engine bay. I think that's going to do a huge service to that car. So it's kind of curious that Moath mentioned that, because that was the conversation that I had with my boyfriend when we were driving around. Literally just about how Audi did it and how Acura could maybe follow in their footsteps in that one regard.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that I was in Integra a couple of weeks ago. I've been in the current RDX, which I was really, really impressed with. Overall, I think that in this current generation, styling, content, and then like fun to drive factor, Acura has improved. And I don't think that they were ever bad. I think that they were always, to your point, like more of a compromise brand in terms of, you're getting that practicality. You're getting the sense that it's effectively, I'm buying kind of a Honda product under the skin. I can feel good about that. I can feel good about things like resale, long-term value, serviceability and service cost and things like that. But I'm still having, the better part of a luxury experience in the vehicle I'm getting, sort of scaling up and down depending on how much money you're actually spending. So,
and let's address the Honda elephant a little bit real quick too, because this is probably the first TLX product that hasn't felt like a warmed over Accord. Like, they've really done a good job of actually making the TLX feel like a very distinct Acura specific product, and that's because it's riding on its own platform and it doesn't really actually share that much aside from some switches and probably some hard bolts and stuff like that. But it really does feel like an Acura. For the first time in a very long time, they've built a car that doesn't just feel like an expensive Honda. So we got to give them credit for that.
I almost agree. The notable exception is the famously is the TLSH-AWD 6-speed manual, which was built on an Accord platform, but an exceptional sleeper sports sedan. That, especially if you live in climates, variable climates, really kind of an amazing car. So, but yeah, I can see it. I can see it now. They're leaning in for sure. They're leaning into having a proper sports sedan that goes head to head, as you're talking about with the Germans, which is great. Super producer Kyle asked Tiger Eye Gold versus Phoenix Yellow. Is Phoenix Yellow Acura's yellow? Is that Integra yellow?
No, Phoenix Yellow actually is the color that Moath has in his icon, his bio. It's the E46 yellow.
Right.
Also a fantastic 1974 inspired color.
Overall, yellow cars are tough. Years ago, this might have been like in year one of Smith and I working together at a place called Winding Road. I did a list of the cars that look the best in stupid colors, and like oftentimes that's yellow, and it's sort of hard to pull off. It's very bimodal. It's either like very cheap small cars or incredibly expensive supercars, and yellow falls on that list. It's hard to wear it. This doesn't, the gold doesn't even enter into that equation for me. I think it's a good classy color, especially with those dark alloys. But all right, let's move on. Let's talk about some big boys, some big luxury sedans, because I've been in two of them in subsequent weeks. Not as different as you'd think, despite the fact that they have different powertrains, right? So let's go G90 first. Genesis G90, which I had last week, and honestly was very surprised by overall. Like, I have so many thoughts about this vehicle. We've got images now. These are, I believe, Jeff Perez took these. He had a loan, and also did the first drive of the car in Florida. My car is a different color. It was a matte gray. It's called Makalu. I've got the Monroney pulled up here in front of me. The only option on the car was the paint that it had. It was a matte gray that got dusty and terrible, and nobody should buy it. I mean, I think that it looks nice, probably in press photos, but maybe you guys will disagree with me. But I'm a hard no on matte paint on cars, unless maybe you live in like Phoenix or LA. Maybe you can pull it off in super warm weather climates where it never rains. But
I even struggle with it in the press photos. There's something about that car that still looks primered to me. I don't know if like the body panels don't perfectly line up where they join, but one color looks like one panel looks like it catches way more light than the others, and it just looks off to me. I don't understand the matte paint obsession. I really don't.
I'm with you. I don't. I mean, maybe it's because I've done a lot of just body work, paint work over. It feels like it's like, okay, it's in primer. Now let's go ahead and put the color down, right? But I mean, that said, I have seen some vehicles. I mean, if it's done right, like a classic muscle car or something, if you're just going for a really mean look, Not something like this though. Not something like the Genesis.
I think it's a great point, Chris. I think that like matte paint works well for me in cars that where it's a surprise, where you it's sort of a, it's a zag from what you'd expect to be on the car. That looks kind of neat. And don't get me wrong, the car looked good. Literally, I had an experience where like a family, I let like a dad and a mom and a kid like all on bicycles go in front of me, and as they were on a crosswalk and as they were making the turn, the dad waved me down and said, "That's an awesome car," like just completely out of nowhere. So people are at least responding to it. Let me just get this quickly because I like, the aesthetic thing is always a little bit tough. I think this is the car, like some of the best wheels I've seen in a long time. I think some of the shapes and the body side are really interesting. The interior is very nice looking and really well done. Overall, I think it's pretty ugly. I think the grille is so overwhelmingly over the top, like that it dominates it, and the headlights like sort of split by the wheel well are a little off to me. They don't ever look completely aligned in a weird way with the strip over the wheel well. There's just too much going on. And honestly, here it looks better. This is on me. I should have taken photos of the car that I had, but it was so dirty the entire time I had it. It was unfortunate, but it pulls off the shape a little bit better in my mind in lighter colors and in white than it does in dark colors, where that front just becomes a mass of like dark grille, dark lower grille, and then the sort of like weird shapes that are happening there too. So,
you can see where like the G80, some of the G80's cues get picked up. You can like very obviously see those, but for some reason it just doesn't quite. The G80 is fabulous. I think it's one of the best looking cars on the road. For some reason, the G90 doesn't quite pick up that baton quite as well. I don't know.
I'm with you, and I'm not a fan of big grills. I really love the split light design. I think Hyundai and Genesis I feel like they're just hitting it right now with design, but the G90 is a little awkward with that grill. I think I've said before, even with the G80, if it didn't dip down quite as far, it feels like, okay, here's our size, just make it fit. Okay, well, we'll just kind of shove that lower fascia down a little bit, and you shoved it into the box. It's kind of what it feels like to me. If that was a little bit smaller, I think that would just make 1,000% difference.
So I think we're agreed. Like it's at least a little bit strange. Like great from some angles or better from some angles than others, but not always ideal. But so let me start with because that's not even the primary complaint. Let me start with what's good about this car in my estimation. I had to call Brandon Turkis, managing editor of Motor1.com, like on the second or third day that I had it. It was the morning I dropped my kids off, so I had a little bit of time. I went on a good drive. I did like a 20-minute River Road loop in the car. So this car is it's 400 horsepower, 401 horsepower. It's a 3.5 liter V6 with electrification. So it's essentially a hybrid, or it is a hybrid. Total output is 409 and 405 pound-feet of torque, right? In a big vehicle. And I just kind of didn't know, even going into it, as Genesis brand still new. I'm like, am I supposed to believe that this is like sort of like a large car with sporting pretensions? Is it just purely like a limo? Is it all about ride quality? There's a sport mode. Does it mean anything? And I went and did that drive and came back. I had to call Brandon anyways, and I got on the phone and I was like, I'm just getting like big, 2 generations old 5 Series vibes from driving this car really, really hard, right? Like the engine sounds like nothing until you get on it. The V6 sounds amazing in this car. Like it's really throaty. The pedal in sport mode is incredibly responsive. It's still a big, heavy car, right? Like there's a ton going on. It doesn't feel like a sports sedan at all, but like it's really rewarding with the feedback that it does give, within the kind of bounds of it being a big luxury, almost limo. And the powertrain is excellent on the car. I was really, really surprised and very impressed with what happens to this big thing when you actually start hammering on it on a good road. So, absolute, like, major kudos to Genesis there for putting it together. I don't know if that matters. Does it matter for this car? Like, I mean, do you care if your 7 Series or your S Class or whatever it is, or your G90 is able to go around a corner reasonably well?
I mean, I don't think so. Okay. I don't think, and in my mind, I mean, I love sporting sporty driving vehicles. In my mind, I'm not really looking for that in the G90.
The previous G90 also was like a very avowed like 1972 Lincoln Town Car knockoff, like it really just wanted to be big and comfortable and soft and smooth. And it was great. Like it was every car nowadays has to feel like damped and buttoned down and stuff like that. And sometimes there's a mood where you just want to glide over potholes and not even notice that anything's underneath you. And so it's kind of curious that they're going a little bit more toward that, like that BMW version of full-size sedans where, it's damped and buttoned down and everything like that. Won't complain. I guess it's fun to be able to chuck a big 4,500 pound car into a corner.
It didn't feel, and honestly, to me, like it didn't fall apart like in on the comfort level at all. I still think it's a very comfortable car. I think it's got that cruising mode. I think that you can get that out of it. The wheels are huge. The wheels are what, 22s or 21s. And as great as they look, they do, I think, impact ride quality a little bit as a result of that. But yeah, so I was very surprised with the sort of sporting chops there. All that being said, this is great interior shot. I also don't love, you guys can see there are two rotary dials in the center there, and this is a thing that I talked about a little bit with other Genesis vehicles. Like one of those is your transmission, one of those is your infotainment. They're very clearly, they look different, they're shaped differently, they have different touch points, and yet maybe it's just me, my brain can't process it fast enough. I'm often grabbing for the wrong one to either change the gear or change what I want to do on the screen. Just, it's a second doing it. It's just one of those, like, I guess maybe that's a little bit of the thesis, is a lot of the technology in this car for me was like, okay, but could it be 5 to 20% less annoying? Right? Like, could we get rid of, there's a barrier on some of this stuff where it's like, I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze on some of the decisions they've made with the interfaces and the technology in the car. Right. So the shifter versus infotainment control is one of them, although that's pretty small. I think that I would get over it after a little bit longer.
Well, I mean, you say small, but I mean, this is kind of one of my benchmarks in vehicles. I feel like there should be like a base level of intuitiveness that applies to pretty much any vehicle. And if there's something small like that, yeah, you know what, you'll get used to it over time. But something like choosing what gear you're in versus controlling the infotainment, that should just be that falls into one of the intuitive categories, right? So the fact that it's just catching you up a little bit, yeah, I could see that being they could have done more, right?
Yeah, I don't know the purpose of the change of both of these things. Now, like I won't do it now, but like we can fight later about the use of the word and the meaning of the word intuitive, because I don't think any of these things is intuitive, like as it's literally defined, but that's fine. So there's that. The other thing that was really driving me crazy, and I think this might be G90 only, but this is a great photo to look at. You guys see the buttons on the very bottom on the outward side that have doors. Those are allegedly, or not allegedly, they are meant to activate the automatic doors on the G90, right? My family has yet to be in a vehicle in 2022, maybe ever, that had more frustrating doors than the G90 did. So these are powered doors. They have buttons on the door cards on the handles, the interior handles, to open and close them. You can also automatically open and close them here. But I just watched, before this podcast, I watched like a 5-minute video that Genesis has on how to change all the other settings for the automatic doors. I don't think that you can turn them off. And so ultimately what you're faced with is every time you get in and out of the car, out isn't so bad. Get into the car, every time you want to shut the door, you're figuring out the least intrusive way to fight the motor that wants to automatically close the door if you want to just close it yourself. Right? So you know what it feels like to close a power tailgate without pushing the button, how you're pushing against the motor? That's the experience every single time you're closing a door without a button on this car, which just blows my mind.
And hitting the button wasn't it wasn't satisfying to just hit the button and get settled?
Hitting the button is fine, but like it's not it's certainly not something that you're used to doing. It's not quicker than opening and closing the door with a handle. And from the outside, you can't do it, right? Like you can hit the they call it, what's the terminology? There's a little detent in the door handle that pops out that's effectively like a button, and you're meant to push that button and then the door will close automatically. But like a lot of these like smaller touch buttons, at least in my experience, it's not 100% accurate, right? Like I would touch that, sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't, right? Imagine now too, and I realize that this is not meant to be a minivan, but I've got a 3-year-old getting in and out of the car, right? So to be able to quickly close a door when you're putting, like, you know, especially on like the street side or something, putting a kid in is fairly important. And instead I'm sort of fussing around with these buttons, or maybe I'm meant to be chauffeuring somebody who's in the back and using like the door closer from up front, or they're using their own door closer to shut the door. The point is, it feels like a luxury feature that's meant to like kind of wow and amaze everybody as like what a you know, technologically advanced car this is. And I think the reality is that it's just it's a lot of money and engineering spent on something that was extremely frustrating and maybe would be a good thing to turn on in certain scenarios, but not something that you would want to live with day in and day out. At least that's my take. Am I going too hard against the automatic doors here, or
I mean, you're talking to a guy that owns 2 cars that are 27 years old and one of them doesn't run. So I don't know if I'm the best, if I'm the best judge on that. I can, the tech is cool, but not being able to turn it off if you need, I can see that being extraordinarily frustrating. It's like, I just want to shut the door. You know, I just want to shut the door. And it's not a difficult thing.
I'm trying to think of other cars. So like Rolls-Royce has power closing doors. And I can't think of anything else on the market that does, aside from like the little soft close. So yeah, I mean, it is a little silly that it like turning any 1-step process into a 2 or a 3-step process is incredibly frustrating. Like the shifters, for example, like the dial shifters, you know, sometimes you go too far and you hit neutral instead of drive, like anything like that used to just be like a one and done and you knew exactly what you were doing. And then just changing it for the sake of change is a little annoying. I get that they're trying to wow people, but yeah, it is a little silly that there's no way around it. That if you want to just get out and bump the door shut with your butt, you can do that. But apparently, it's not possible.
I'm gonna find the video. I should have prepped us to have it so that we could, but you kind of need to listen to it anyways. It really is. It's 4 or 5 minutes just on the options to turn off or turn on with the power closed doors. And it's like there's an option where the driver can step on the brake to close all of the doors that are opened, right? You can turn that on and off. There are different ways that you can set it up so that the door handles pop out, like, you know, kind of Tesla style, or like many EVs at this point. You can make it, you can select it so that different door handles pop out, right? When you walk up to the car, if you've got the key activated, there's a lot of customization to it. So I'm actually not even, I've only, the research in the car turned up nothing in terms of turning the auto doors off. The research online turned up nothing in terms of turning them off. Still very possible that you could do it. Maybe somebody at Genesis needs to school me on how to do it. But yeah, it felt like innovation for the sake of innovation and not for something that's truly great. Now, sorry, I've been rambling about doors for a really long time.
We're veering into old man yells at cloud territory.
I know.
So.
I always. So let's talk really quickly. This the car that is in my driveway right now. I sort of previewed this by saying, like, I do think that this, in a lot of ways, today is a competitor for the G90. Is the 2022 Mercedes EQS. I have the 450 plus sedan. So this is the sort of the entry point for EQS. Fully electric car, really impressive, like overall. Like, this is a car, I had a conversation with somebody today. I had it plugged in a parking garage when I was grabbing lunch. It was the first one that they saw, and it's one of those vehicles right now, right, where if anybody knows what it is, they're fascinated by it. They think it's incredible. It does look like a spaceship on wheels that has just landed on Earth. Yeah, that is not my driveway. Maybe someday I'll live in Iron Man's house and I'll drive my EQS there. But overall, the car is. I think that we can say in general, and Brett, you can speak to this better than me because you've been in a lot of products. I think what Mercedes is doing with EQ as a brand is incredibly impressive, and their EV technology is very impressive. They've gotten off to a fast start with it, and the EQS is sort of a pretty good standard bearer for what they're capable of now in terms of battery tech and drivability and all that stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. They're really good cars. kind of they still feel very Mercedes, which is great. You know, like it's kind of proof that you don't necessarily need a gas engine for a car to carry some brand identity. And they've done a great job of making sure that this still feels very, very much like an S-Class EV. I have some problems with it. I'm curious to hear your take on the car now that you've been with it for a week. I've only ever driven them in like, one day at a time. So I haven't had that like daily drive experience.
So first of all, quickly, we've got Dominic saying the best experience from the inside, and he's right. Like we'll pop up an interior photo. The car that I have has the full Hyperscreen package, which is a lot of money. It's the M-Bucks Hyperscreen package, $7,230 as I'm looking at my sheet here for the Hyperscreen package, which essentially gives you digital display all the way across, like driver, instrument binnacle, gigantic center screen that's sort of shared, but a little bit more oriented toward the driver. And we can stop here because this is the first point where I really question it, is the passenger facing version or portion of the screen. I'm not sold yet at all now in like 4 cars on the need for a passenger to have a screen, or maybe they want it, but what are they meant to do with it? What is the passenger supposed to be doing with this screen?
I have thoughts.
Okay, let's hear them.
So first and foremost, I remember I drove the EQS SUV a couple of weeks ago, and it was wonderful. It was really good. Everything that I liked about the EQS sedan, but with more space, so it was great. I love that. I was driving the EQS SUV with a co-driver, and they were just like messing with their seat heating and like playing with all the buttons and all the things that you do when you're testing a car. You kind of like do all the features, get the seat locked in where you want it. And it would have been really annoying if it weren't for the Hyperscreen, because they could do it all on their little screen. I had the map display right here. That's my first point. And that goes away, obviously. Like your regular passenger isn't going to be playing with their seat settings and everything like that for 20 minutes while you're driving down the road. But the second point is, a lot of these cars completely lock out the navigation system unless you're using voice commands. If you're driving down the road, if it's moving. With the Hyperscreen, your passenger can do everything on their screen. They can enter destinations or whatever and send it over to you to approve. So your passenger looks up where you guys are going and sends the destination over to the main screen, and you hit approve and you're good to go. So that's my second point, that I think it actually does add some functionality besides being just a silly Gee Whiz technology feature. So I really like that about it.
That makes sense to me, and I appreciate that. I would only say the car also offers wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, right? So all of the things that you might want to share between the driver, like, is the phone in my co-driver or my passenger's pocket a better utility than the Hyperscreen? At, I don't know, even an iPhone 14 is what, $1,000 these days. So it's only 7 times more expensive than the Hyperscreen is only 7 times more expensive than the iPhone to do roughly the same thing.
What you're losing with a lot of those, though, is the route planning that the EQS includes built in. Like if you're taking a long trip and you enter your destination, the EQS is going to tell you, okay, in 220 miles, you're going to stop here. You're going to charge for 45 or 15 minutes, and then you're going to get on the road again. And you don't really get that when you're using CarPlay. I agree that like generally CarPlay and Android Auto are much better interfaces, much easier to use than even the best infotainment system. But at least with the endemic stuff, you get like charge functionality and everything.
Yeah, that's completely fair. And I would say, I don't think that Mercedes is doing it for no reason. I don't think that Stellantis is doing it for no reason, for sure. But my take on it right now is that it still stands out more as a way to get people excited about cars and excited about it. Sort of messages or telegraphs the technology of the vehicle overall in a way that is maybe more useful than the actual functionality day to day of that screen. So.
Well, and to your point, like $7,000 is so much money to
crazy.
Get an incremental amount of functionality added to your daily drive. Like, and it comes standard on the higher level models at least, which is nice. But I'm assuming you have a 450 plus, and adding $7,000 just to get a few extra inches of real estate is
but I mean, we're talking about an EQS. People are still paying a lot of money for the car, anyways. I don't know. I don't know that that's really. I don't think that's really a big deal to the people buying this car. I would, since I'm right in the middle here of the of Seyth and Brett here on our little screen, I have to take the middle route. I totally follow Brett, and maybe it's an age thing, but if I'm driving somewhere with my wife, it's very comforting to say, hey, okay, we're going here. Can you plug this into the GPS? I'm focused on driving, it's raining, so whatever, can you handle some of these features? Yeah. Having that capability over there, great. I think it's great. But Seyth, you're also right in that there's still a lot of gimmickiness going on here. It's a case of we have more screens, so we are better. Why are we better? Because there are more.
Well, that's it. I mean, we're getting increasingly, we're getting like figures of like total screen real estate, like in cabins and stuff, as like a number that to brag about. And I get it. It is cool. You get in it and you're like, you do feel like you're driving the future for the first time. But I think then sometimes you really have to like dive into, does this matter to me, like minute by minute, day by day, and year by year as I own the car, right? And that's where I'm a little bit more skeptical. Just quickly too, because I know that we're going over. I just wanted to hit and again, like Brett, maybe because you've been in this, like I don't know if you have the same experience or not. The two very strange things, because generally I agree. I'm sort of focusing on the negative here. The large picture is this is I'm not going to call it a beautiful car because I think it's incredibly strange looking, but I think it's a beautiful cabin. It's a beautifully a car that's beautiful to drive. Magic carpet ride, almost sort of ride quality. Does feel like an S class. It feels like you're in a grown-up billionaire's car, right? Like it feels like you're in something that really is making a statement and is isolating you from the outside world in a way that's really nice for something that costs, Smith, to your point, this one is $116,000. It starts at 102, and this is the 450 plus. So it goes way up from there when you get more power, bigger batteries and all that, right? Weird thing, consistently but in over lots of different braking scenarios, the handoff or the interaction between friction brakes and regenerative brakes in this car, incredibly weird. Like it's thumping into, I'm getting an ABS thump sometimes, and I've had it happen now from high speed to low or high speed stops to the last time it happened. It was like I was 20 miles an hour and I stopped because I was turning and I saw somebody wanting to cross the crosswalk, and I just lightly kind of touched the brake to stop the car, and I got an ABS bump, or what I don't actually think that's what it is, but some sort of like strange handshake between the two braking systems, right? Like not as classy at all.
Yeah.
I suppose, but
that's interesting. I haven't experienced that. When you started talking about brakes, that's not where I thought you were going. I thought you were going to how the brake pedal moves as the car automatically adds regen. I don't know if you experienced that, but like you're not touching the brake pedal at all. You lift off the throttle, and if your car's in max regen setting or the automatic regen setting, the brake pedal will actually move. And Mercedes says that's because they want the car to have the same amount of brake pedal movement per, specific amount of brake force, And so you leave the brake pedal way up here, you lift off the throttle and you go move your foot over there expecting to find the brake pedal, but since the car's decelerating for you, it's not. You have to actually move your foot a little bit more. So that's a little weird. I've never experienced that handoff though. That sounds like maybe I don't know if it's an early production issue, or maybe it's something that they've identified and will issue a TSB for, or maybe it's just a weird one-off with your car. That's really curious.
Yeah, I don't know. It's strange because the first time it happened, it was the first run in the car, and I was, kind of out in an empty road and stepped on it to sort of to see how quick it was, essentially, and then hauled it right back down with not a foot to the floor, but a really strong brake pedal. And I thought I just got a little ABS out of it, which even then was strange because it wasn't, dry road, like presumably new tires, like it should have had plenty of traction to make that stop. But I was like, well, maybe it's slightly conservative tuning on this braking. And then it's happened multiple times, like I said, a different kind of braking conditions, to the point where I do think it's a little bit odd. But there's some other curious things in this car. I think that they largely fall into the same bucket of things that we were talking about with the Genesis, where it's like, this is an advanced technology vehicle, right? It is so packed with features and things that lots of people might be into. I would say that most owners are probably not going to use everything this car is capable of, but it's very nice to have a big, wide feature set with lots of technologies so that you can address specific needs of lots of customers. I think that's true of the Genesis too. So where I was aiming with this, and now we're way over, but I'll just ask you guys quickly and then we can sign off. Both these cars are roughly $110,000. If it's your $110,000 and you want a limo, which one are you buying?
Mercedes.
Smith,
Mercedes.
No
Mercedes,
question.
No question. I think the EQS right now, that is the pinnacle of luxury EV motoring. I would have that over everything else.
If I'm being chauffeured around, I'd take the G90 because I don't think the backseat in the EQS is very habitable, unfortunately, because of the high floor. I cannot believe the Genesis is $110,000. That blows
mine. I'm sorry. I'm overstating it. It's $101,295.
Okay.
So yes, and the Mercedes starts at 102. So they are close at like base, and then obviously the Mercedes is optioned up, so it's got 14 grand worth of options on it. So not entirely fair, but to Chris's earlier point. Yeah,
we can call them 6-figure luxury cars. Yeah, exactly.
6 figures.
Yeah, EQS for me for sure. Absolutely. I think it's really wonderful to drive. I love that it's fully electric, but it doesn't like feel weird. It doesn't feel like a science experiment. It feels like a good luxury car.
Yeah. So we've got Lion just said verdict. I'm not sure what that means. EKG weighed in early and said the EQS is the best EV flagship sedan and a class leader. I would simply say that of the stuff that I've driven, the Lucid Air is still better. It's a lot more expensive. At least the one that I was in was more expensive, but I'd be very curious to have these two things at a reasonable price point comparison, go head to head. And then Dominic weighed in to say EQS all day.
And Dominic really doesn't like the EQS's styling, so that's a pretty valid statement from him.
Mm-hmm.
That's the hardest thing for me is like I prefer driving the EQS overall. Well, no. I don't know. The Genesis is really good, but it hits more of those old school notes. If I was going to drive it hard, it comes down to sort of the overall like fun to drive versus I do like the way the Genesis looks better. I think the EQS looks like an old Apple mouse, and I'm not 100% sure I want to be seen in it all the time. I don't know. I'm teetering. I got to make a call. I'll try and leave a comment with my call. In the meantime, everybody's watching. Thanks so much for hanging with us as we went over. Leave a comment, even if you're getting this after the fact. Tell us which of the two that you would prefer. If you were going to daily a 6-figure luxury car and your choices were a Genesis G90, Mercedes EQS 450 plus, let us know what you'd choose. We got another EQS here. And we'll check those out. I will try and weigh in. In the meantime, we'll be back next week, Friday at 4 o'clock. For yet another test car happy hour. Chris Smith, in 30 seconds, tell us the coolest thing that you're working on over the next week so that we can follow it and or read it and or listen to it.
Oh, over the next week, just go to motor1.com for all your daily news. We are pumping that stuff out on a regular basis. And also catch Rambling About Cars, our weekly podcast. It goes up every Friday, Motor One Podcast on YouTube. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple. In a couple weeks, I'll be actually relocating to Michigan. I'll be able to tell you all about driving a 26-foot U-Haul with a 20-foot trailer. And we have a cool little special. I can't really talk about it now, but just keep your eye out for a cool little special toy. I hesitate to say toy because this thing is going to be super awesome, especially if you're a child of the 80s like I am.
Yeah, it'll for sure like transform the way you feel about children's toys as collectibles.
It very well could. Yes, thank you, Brett. Thank you, Brett, for getting me in trouble.
Brett, what are we reading from you next week?
Next week, you're going to see a Honda CR-V hybrid review going live on Tuesday morning. We also have tons of reviews coming up from the rest of the Motor One editorial staff. Corolla and Highlander Turbo are going up on Tuesday as well. And then we got some really cool stuff coming up next month as we gear up for the Motor One Star Awards.
Star Awards, yes.
Way more on Star Awards coming soon. Thanks, everybody, for hanging with. Thank you guys for joining me, and we'll see you next Friday. Have a great weekend. Bye.